Well, let me just start without the slides just yet. A lot of what we've been doing, talking about, is the puzzle of how there can be meaning, how there can be representation of the objects around us, how there can be sentences that are right or wrong in the world as described by physics. And in a way, that's one version, one aspect of the mind-body problem, how there can be mind in a physical world. Another, the more dramatic example of the mind-body problem is a problem of conscious experience. How come there can be sensations? How come there can be pains and headaches and thrills of joy and pangs and itches and so on in a physical world? Where do these things fit in to the physics of the brain? And the way I've been setting things up so far, these are two, for all I've said, quite separate problems. There's a problem about how you can represent the world around you, even though you're just a physical thing governed by physical laws. And there's a problem of how you can have these conscious sensations, conscious experiences. And that looks like quite a different problem. But what I want to suggest is that these are actually connected problems. If you think about what Fodor and Rechke were doing when they were trying to explain how there could be representation in a physical world, the idea there was you can characterize the ability to represent the world around you as a matter of having this causal responsiveness to the world. In principle, the same kind of causal responsiveness that a bacterium might have to its environment. And you can do all that, you can address those questions, what kind of causal responsiveness is that, without thinking about whether the organism has experience, whether the organism is conscious. And that's a very clean kind of approach to the issue. But if thought about your surroundings depends on experience of your surroundings, then the problem is actually going to be much more difficult. If you think about Polishion's way of, if you weren't here the last couple of sessions, has everyone looked at the Polishon? Do you have some sense of what goes on in the Polishon? This idea of a visual index in your visual system in the brain, tracking the things around you. In principle, you could have something like the kind of visual system Polishion's describing, even though you weren't conscious. An organism that wasn't conscious, a humble honeybee or something like that, might have these kind of visual indexes, be able to keep track of multiple objects in a display. And Polishon would say that's representing the world around it, that's referring to the objects around it, even though it has no awareness of the objects in the world around it. Suppose you think, though, of someone who's blind-sighted. I don't know how widely known blind sight is. Can you put your hand up if you've heard of blind sight? Okay, about a third. That's quite a lot. Okay, a blind sight patient is someone who has had damage to the visual system in their brain. So basically the back of their head has been damaged, where the visual system comes from the eyes to the back of the brain, then to a first big, what's the word I want, destination at the back of the brain. Then the visual system splits into two parts, up to the top and down to the bottom. And it's thought that the part at the top is carrying visual experience. The part at the bottom is letting you act and move in relation to the world around you on the basis of vision. So they're both visual, but only one part of it is carrying experience. In a blind sight patient, there's no input to the stuff at the top. There is no input to the stuff that carries experience. So this patient has no visual experience of the world in one half of their visual field. That's to say, you've got this patient, and if you say, can you see how many fingers I'm holding up on this left side of your visual field? The answer is, I don't know. I can't see a thing there. They have no experience in the left side of the visual field. If you say to them, guess, just guess how many, they reliably get it right. Not always, but well above chance. If you say to them, there's a line in the left side of your visual field, is it upright or horizontal? They say, well, I've no idea. I can't see a thing there. They have no experience in that side of their visual field. You say to them, go on, we'll give you $5 if you guess. And they say, all right, well, I'll guess, but I have no idea. And they guess, well, it's upright. And they are reliably correct as to whether it's upright or not. The patients themselves are typically quite surprised that they're getting it right so often, I mean, as you would be. Okay? So in blind sight, someone is getting visual information from some part of their visual field that they have no experience in. So they can be reliably making correct guesses about the orientation of a line in the blind field, even though they have no experience there. If you say, reach for the object in your blind field, they will shape their hand correctly to pick up the object, whether it's a cup or a bottle or whatever it is. They will shape their hand correctly to pick up that thing. Suppose that this was quite general. Suppose you're a patient who could reliably make correct guesses about all aspects of what was in their blind field. They say, is it a person? Is it a TV? What is it in your blind field? They get it right, let's suppose, every time. The empirical facts are that blind sight patients it was originally thought they are just getting right these very primitive things about the orientation of a line and how to shape their hand. And then experimenters probed more and more just how much the patient could be shown to be getting about what was in their blind field. And it's just a startling amount. So this is going beyond the data, but it's going in the direction of the data to suppose they get everything right. The shape, the color, is it a person? Who is it in your blind field? But they have no awareness of that. Is that patient in a position to understand reference to things in their blind field? They might have Polish-style visual indexes tracking the objects in their blind field. But if you say, that person in your blind field, do they know who you're talking about? Are they in a position to understand the singular term? And what's your hunch? Do you have a hunch? Have I explained this correctly? Of course, yes. Okay, well, try this. Suppose that just as you sit here, someone says to you, who's that woman over there? You know, you drift off from the lecture, the person beside you drifts off from the lecture, they nudge you and they say, who's that woman over there? And you look round and all you get is a sea of faces. You can't distinguish which one it is that the person is talking about. And they say, well, what is this person wearing? Guess. And you say, I have no idea. I have no idea which person you're talking about. And they say, well, guess, is that person wearing a scarf? And you say, well, I don't know. And they say, look, we'll give you $5. Just do it. Just do the guess. And you do the guess, and you get it right. They say, that's right. They are wearing a scarf. They say, is this person brown-haired or light-haired? You say, well, I have no idea who you're talking about. And you say, $5, and they guess, and they get it right. Say, are they sitting? Well, sitting or standing is not too good. Are their arms folded or out in front of them? And you guess, and you get it right. Suppose you keep doing this. So you are just like the blind-sighted person. You're reliably making the correct guesses about about the characteristics of the person your neighbour is referring to. But do you know who they're talking about? What would you say in that situation? I'll tell you what I would say. Well, I would say I have no idea what's going on here. I don't know who you're talking about. I don't know which person this is, though I understand that I'm making all these correct guesses. Does that sound insane? How many of you would say, no, you do know who they're talking about, it's just that you don't have experience of them? I mean, that sounds like a contradiction to me. You see what I mean? You do know who they're talking about. Ordinarily, if I say to you, who is that man over there? Then, look, as you look around the room, your gaze lights now on one person, now on another. You, as it were, put a bit of yellow highlighter in your experience, first over this person, then over that person. You see what I mean? You single them out in your experience. And if someone says to you, who is that man there? Then what you have to do is single out that person from the crowd and say, that's it, that's the one they're talking about, that's the one I'm referring to. That's usually what would make you say, yeah, I see which one you mean. If you can't do that, if you just get the sea of faces, then you're going to say, I don't know who you're referring to. It seems to me that if you've got a blind sight patient who can make these correct guesses about what's going on in the blind field, then in Wittgenstein's sense, this patient knows the use of the sign. This patient is going to say, that person is wearing a jacket, that person is wearing a scarf, in just the right circumstances. In Wittgenstein's sense, they've got the use of the sign. They talk the right way. The way they talk with the sign fits in with what everyone else is doing. But the patient doesn't know who the sign stands for. The patient doesn't have the reference of the sign. The patient hasn't managed to single that thing out in experience. Just the way when it's all a sea of faces, you haven't managed to single out who it is that we're talking about. So if that's right, then it's your experience of the object, it's your conscious awareness of an object that gives you knowledge of what that sign stands for. It's not just a causal connection. You could have a causal connection to the object without having experience of it. A blind sight patient has got a causal connection to the object, but they just don't have experience of it. So it's when you have experience of the thing that you know which thing we're talking about. It's experience of the object that gives you knowledge of reference. So this makes the mind-body problem here worse, not better, right? Because the problem of how there can be right or wrong in your use of a sign is related to this problem about consciousness. It's only because you're conscious that you can know which objects your signs stand for. You can't be said to know who someone is referring to in this kind of case unless you're aware of that person, unless you single them out in experience. That's my first claim today. If you're going to have reference to an object, you've got to have experience of that thing. When Frege was talking about your take on the thing, your way of being given the thing, the mode of presentation of the thing, and really the basic case of that is a case where you're aware of the thing and there's some way that you're aware of it. It has to do with your way of experiencing the object. That's what we're talking about. So reference depends on experience. Plain enough? Okay? Okay. Well, this is actually what Russell was saying. You remember back when we were talking about descriptions in singular terms? Descriptions and proper names. So Russell has, this is in the last reading in the reader. He says, well, you can have knowledge by description of something. You can make a remark about, let's say, the tallest person in this room. I can say, well, the tallest person in this room, I bet you anything, the tallest person in this room weighs more than 150 pounds. That's pretty safe. Really, I think I can say I know that. The tallest person in this room weighs more than 150 pounds. The tallest person in this room is, I would guess, over 5'10". Yeah. You can build up a picture there. You can get quite a lot of knowledge just by thinking about it, what characteristics the tallest person in the room must have. You can do all that without having identified which person is the tallest. You didn't have to get everybody lined up and figure out which one was the tallest to do that. When scientists take a notion like the center of mass of the solar system and figure out what characteristics it must have, what kind of gravitational forces will there be on the center of mass of the solar system, you can do that without having figured out where it is. You don't need to know which place that is in order to figure out things about it. So just from having a description of the thing, you can figure out that there is such a thing. You can say, well, there's got to be such a thing. It's very unlikely that there's no person who's the tallest in the room. Surely there must be such a thing as the center of mass of the solar system. And you can figure out just from the description what kind of characteristics it's got to have. That's different to when you take, I'll be with you in a second. That's different from when you simply encounter someone and find out about this person just by seeing what they're like. Suppose you take a notion like the first headache I'm going to have in the new year. You take a notion like the first headache I'm going to have next year. Let's say that will, you can say what you like, but that's very unlikely to be caused by theory of meaning, right? It might be, but it's unlikely, right? You could say, well, I know that the first headache I have next year will be caused by Sally. That I can just tell you right now. You can know that without knowing anything about the headache as a result of having a direct encounter with it. So you can know about your headache by description. You can say, well, the first headache, the first headache I'm going to have in 2009. But then there's a kind of characterization you have of a headache when you actually have it. when you say, this headache is unendurable, this pain is exquisite, this headache is sharp and piercing, it's not the dull, heavy kind. This is one of the sharp, stabbing variety. When in these cases you have your knowledge of the headache, not by figuring out that there is such a thing and saying what it's got to be like, you have it just as a result of your direct encounter with the thing. That's what Russell calls knowledge by acquaintance. It's not that you had to have a description of the thing, you just encountered it and that told you what it was like. And Russell says, I say I'm acquainted with the object. I don't just have knowledge by description of it. I'm acquainted with the object when I have a direct cognitive relation to that object. That is, when I'm directly aware of the object itself. So you can make remarks like the tallest person in the room will be over 5'10". That's a different thing than if you just encounter someone and on the basis of seeing what height they are, say, this person's over 5'10". And it's experience that's providing you with acquaintance. Experience and direct awareness are the same thing. Russell says, I use the word acquaintance to emphasize the relational character of the fact with which we're concerned. So it's not that you're representing the thing. When you're having the headache, when you're encountering the headache, it's not that you're representing it. You're directly related to your own headache. It's just you and the headache and this relation of acquaintance between you. So you're not representing it, you're just encountering it. And Russell says, we'll say we have acquaintance with anything of which we're directly aware without the intermediary of any process of inference or any knowledge of truth. So when you have the primal confrontation with the object you're going to think about, it is just you and the object and this relation of acquaintance, this relation of consciousness. It's not that you're representing it, it's not that you have a description of it, it's that you have this direct confrontation with it. No inferences, no representation of what's true about the object. And when you ask, what is it that we're acquainted with? Russell thinks it's sense data that you're acquainted with. It's your own sense data that you encounter in experience. What experience gives you, first and foremost, is your own sensations. So when you see a colour or you hear a noise, what you're getting immediately is that encounter with the colour patch or the auditory sense datum itself. And then also he thinks it's not just that you're acquainted with a particular sound or a particular patch. You also get general characteristics. You can encounter Sally, but you can also be acquainted with, encounter the is tall part. There are also universals or general characteristics that you can encounter in experience. Not only are we aware of particular yellows, but if you've seen a sufficient number of yellows and have sufficient intelligence, you're aware of the universal yellow. So you can encounter the yellowness itself in experience. Though as Russell says, we tend to notice only the particulars and not notice the general characteristics. But if you just focus, you can do it. You can recognize that you are encountering the yellowness. And you can make judgments like yellow is different to blue, or yellow resembles blue less than green does. I guess that's true. Yellow resembles blue less than green does. These are judgments about universals, not judgments about particular things. And you can do that because you've experienced yellow and blue and green. So what's going on is that in experience you encounter particulars, you also encounter universals. You put them together, you have propositions. That's the basis of your ability to think about the things around you. That capacity to be acquainted with particulars, to be acquainted with universals, and put them together in judgments. So the universal yellow is the predicate in judgments like, this is yellow, where this is a particular sense datum that you're acquainted with, that you're encountering in experience. So it's not some causal responsiveness, and it's not some pattern of use that's providing you with your understanding of a statement like this is yellow. It's not the fact that you're embedded in a broader community, and it's not the way you respond to your environment. It's that you are encountering the object, and you're acquainted with the universal yellowness. Russell thinks among the objects with which we're acquainted are not included physical objects, nor other people's minds. You only find out about the physical objects by description. You can say, I'm having some table-ish sense data. Therefore, there must be such a thing as the table that is causing these sense data. Just as you can say, there must be such a thing as the center of mass of the solar system, and then go on to speculate about what it's like. You can say, there's got to be a table out there, otherwise why would I be having all these table-ish sense data? You frame the description, the cause of these table-ish sense data, the table that's causing these sense data, and then you can speculate about what it's got to be like. Other people's minds, you can't be directly acquainted with someone else's mind. You can see that they're writhing in agony, crying out in pain, and say, since all that's going on, there is likely a pain behind all that. Let us conjecture as to what it's like. But you know about someone else's pain by description, just the same way you know about the center of mass of the solar system. It's a hypothesis that there is such a thing. These things, the tables, the chairs, the other people, the other minds, other people's mental states, you know about them by description, whereas the basic proper names you know about on the basis of acquaintance. So your merely descriptive knowledge of the such and such, the so-and-so, although you know the so-and-so exists, and although you may be acquainted with the object that is in fact the so-and-so, but you don't know any proposition of the form A is the so-and-so, where A is a proper name, where A is a term like this or that, where A is something with which you're acquainted. So that's Russell's distinction between knowledge by acquaintance and knowledge by description. And there's a difference between knowledge by description doesn't at all involve experience of the thing that you're describing. Knowledge by acquaintance always has to have experience or consciousness of the thing that you're acquainted with. And the thing is, Russell thinks that you can only refer to things that you're acquainted with. Reference is the same thing as acquaintance. To be able to refer to something is to be acquainted with it, to have that relation of direct conscious experience. Okay, plain as day. Yep. Only by description. You can't really refer to it. No, you're right, we can't refer to it. You can form a description, the pain that is probably causing that behavior, but you can't say this in the way that you can with your own headache. You can just say, this is awful. When you're pointing to someone else, when you say, that is awful, there is no such thing as singling out the pain in your experience. All you can do is say, I have a hypothesis, there's some pain lying behind that, and frame that description. That's what he's saying. You realize that if this is right, then everything we've been saying from, I guess, Kripke on has been basically mistaken. Yeah. Yep. Uh-huh. Okay. That's right. Perception of object. You said perception. Let me just play this back to you. It's not going to be explaining anything, this account, because it's supposing the perception of objects has this explanatory priority over being able to refer to the objects. Is that what you said? Experience, anyway, yeah. But yeah, perception, fine, yeah. That's right. Yeah. Okay. Very good. Yeah. Excellent. Okay. He's talking about acquaintance as a relation between you and the thing, right? And as you say, you could stand in that relation even though you weren't capable of thought at all. Is that right? Yeah. And he's actually got to be saying that if this is going to be explanatory. You see what I mean? It mustn't be just that acquaintance is itself a way of being able to think about the object. It must be something you can do even if you can't think about the object. Yeah? So an animal could be experiencing an object even though it wasn't able to think about it. Yeah? And your point is, but then how does that get converted into thought? All the work's still to be done. If it's something more primitive than thought, how can it get turned into thought? Is that? Yeah. Okay, well, why would you say that the animal doesn't think? Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, where's the explanation? Okay. I think Russell's picture is something like this. When you said conceptual repertoire, the idea there is you've got a kind of vocabulary of concepts. You've got the names of individual things, and you've got these words for universals, like yellow or blue and green and so on. So the language that you have means that there's a kind of structure to your thinking. Something that can't think. An animal doesn't go in for representations with the kind of structure that human language has. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah. So one thing that's distinctive of human thinking is that kind of structure, that you've got a vocabulary of subject terms and general terms that can be put together in many different ways. But that structure isn't enough for you to be thinking about the object. If you have that structure, well, that is the structure of conceptual thought. That's what the animal is missing. But just having that structure is not going to be enough to allow you to think about the world around you. So far, it's just dead signs. It's just something systematic that a computer could perfectly straightforwardly have. But if you ask, how does that structure of signs get hooked up to the world? How do you interpret that, that structured system as referring to the world around you? That's when acquaintance comes in. If you have the two things together, the systematicity and the experience, that will be enough for thought. I think something like that is Russell's picture. So that what you have that goes beyond what the animal has is that structured symbol system. What allows you to interpret it the way you do is the thing you have in common with the animal, the experience of particular objects and the experience of particular properties. Because experience is structured already.
Wouldn't that be like the explanation that how it is to begin, like this structure in the language that allows for meaning
Yeah.
based on experience?
Yeah. Yeah. I think Russell doesn't have an explanation of where that structure comes from. And I think it's very difficult to see how you could give an explanation of where that structure comes from. Because what would you appeal to? You'd either appeal to something about human mental life that is already structured, in which case you just have pushed the problem back one. Yeah, how come that structure was there already? Or else you say, no, it came from something that is not itself structured. But how did that happen? But there must be some answer to that question. But I think Russell does not, so far as I can see, Russell does not have an answer to that. But it's not that he's missing something obvious here. I don't think there is anything obvious here. Am I missing something obvious here? It's always possible. No. Yep.
I don't really understand how this challenge
Uh-huh. Well, the idea of the causal theory was that you're just appealing to a causal chain between you and the object to explain how you can refer to it. You could have a causal chain between you and the object, even if you weren't experiencing the object. If you think about the blind sight case, what's going on in the blind sight case is that the patient does have a causal connection to the object. Yeah? If you have a whole room full of blind-sighted patients, then they could have a whole causal system, a whole causal network of uses of signs tracing back to a single object. None of them has any idea which object that is. None of them has ever experienced it. And Russell's kind of view is saying, therefore, they don't refer to the object. Kripke is saying, but that's what reference is when you have that kind of causal connection.
Right. I'm kind of from something you said in the first section where I believe the slide was experience of the object that provides us with knowledge and reference.
That's right.
And
I did say that, yeah.
I don't really know if the causal theory of reference is concerned with knowledge of reference or whether it's just referring to things correctly.
Referring to, very good, yeah. So referring to the object is one thing, and knowing what you're referring to is another. Yeah. So the
I feel like we miss each other entirely.
yeah. That can happen. I mean, let's see. I make a lot of. I talk to you a bit about the Prime Minister of America or the King of America, and you say, well, actually, you're talking about the President. Right, so that's who I'm referring to. That's where all that stuff is coming from. Yeah, but I hear he's a Democrat. I hear he's from Illinois. Yeah, and You say, yeah, you're talking about the president. But there might be, you might say there's another sense in which I don't know who I'm talking about. Is that right? Is that an example of what I'm referring without knowing who I'm referring to? How can I refer? Explain this to me. How can I refer without knowing who I'm referring to?
Well, technically, the nice example is on like elm trees and beech trees. Like,
Right.
he has no idea like which produce.
Okay. Very good. Okay, so he needn't have experienced either of them. Yeah, he just picked up the words,
Right.
elm and beech.
So, I mean, in a way, like, it could be almost a supplement to causal theory by explaining how experts in society have, like, are able to confirm things.
Yeah.
Presumably someone has to have knowledge of reference if it's not, even if it's not everyone.
That's very good. I mean, it does happen the whole time that you have, I don't know, you ring someone up and a childish voice answers the phone and says, Daddy's at a conference on low temperature physics. And, okay, so there's some sense in which you don't know what they're talking about, right? But another sense in which, yes, that's perfectly correct, right? And they got the right causal chain there. Yeah, they're hooked into the causal chain. I mean, if I talk to you about large hadrons or, so the Big Bang or stuff like that, I might be using the words fine, but I don't really know what I'm talking about. Yeah? And there is a causal theory that explains what's going on. I've got myself into this causal network, so I can use the words correctly. You can even get knowledge by listening to me. But I don't really know what I'm talking about. So you might say, well, the causal theory tells you about that kind of stuff. But in order for there to be people who talk like that, there must be people who are not talking like that. You see what I mean? If you found that Daddy has also no idea what low temperature physics is, but just picked it up from someone else and said, that's where I'm going. Yeah. It can't be that they're all like that. There must, at the end of the day, be someone who has some inkling as to what's going on. So that kind of knowledge that kind of reference without knowledge of reference always depends on people who do know what they're talking about. Yeah. So at the end of the day, this is going to be correct for experience providing knowledge of reference. And then once you have people who have knowledge of reference in place, the rest of us can exploit that in the way you're describing. Is that a fair picture? Okay. So if you put it like that, it's not really a head-on collision between Kripke and the causal theory and Russell. It's rather that Kripke wasn't describing the most fundamental phenomena of reference. When you read Kripke, it looks like he's trying to describe what reference really is, what's going on in the most basic cases of reference. But in this analysis, he's not. He's describing something that just comes into play after the capacity to think about the objects around us is already set up. That's when the causal theory comes in as a kind of second level phenomenon. Russell's describing the basic phenomenon. So you can say there is a place for the causal theory, but it's really describing something that's not of central importance. So that is that.
Well, it seems like, I mean, I would agree that this does seem more like primitive.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it makes the other two second order because it seems like there's just a lot of words and uses that are kind of bullshit and don't really refer to anything and no one knows what they actually
Yes.
refer to. You don't have experts for those words. You can really say floating around. And so I don't really know if it's,
Yeah.
I mean,
Mm.
I don't know if it's, a second order,
Yeah.
They're two different things, but they're not incompatible.
They're not incompatible, I agree. And you could say that, I mean, actually, particularly nowadays, this kind of phenomenon is really widespread. And if you just think about technology, everybody talks about Wi-Fi, the internet. I mean, you press any of us a bit as to what on earth we are talking about when we say Wi-Fi. I mean, I don't know, you know, kind of goes like that, right? You know, the icon goes like that, right? I don't know, I could tell you much more about Wi-Fi. In fact, even a word like electricity, there is an old Steve Martin routine about a guy from the present day who was frozen for 200 years and then woken up, and they say to him things like, well, tell us about electricity. What was that like, having electricity? And he says, well, you know, it came out of the wall. You know, it's much more common than you might think, if you see what I mean, that kind of phenomenon, that you talk all the time, these familiar words. If you're really pressed, how much knowledge do you have of the thing? Yeah. So there's that, it's very pervasive. But really, there have got to be either there's a demonstration underway or I've gone over time again. Have I gone over time? Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, we'll take this. We'll continue with this on Wednesday. Okay, thanks.